quiet night. You come home exhausted after another long day. Your phone is still buzzing. A few unread emails are waiting for you. There's laundry somewhere in the corner of the room. Notifications keep appearing on the screen even though you no longer have the energy to answer anyone. So you do what most people do. You turn on the TV. You scroll for a while. You distract yourself just enough to avoid feeling how tired you really are. And somewhere between the noise, the light from the screen, and the endless movement of modern life, you realize something feels off. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just heavy. The strange part is that your life may actually look fine from the outside. Maybe you have a job, responsibilities, goals, plans for the future. Maybe you even have things you once prayed for. But deep down, something still feels crowded. Your mind feels crowded. Your schedule feels crowded. Even your soul feels crowded. And I think this is becoming one of the biggest problems of modern life. We were taught that more would make us happier, more money, more productivity, more success, more followers, more possessions, more experiences. But the older I get, the more I realize something uncomfortable. Most people are not suffering because life gave them too little. They are suffering because life never stops asking for more attention, more energy, more comparison, more performance. And eventually, you become so overwhelmed by noise that you no longer hear yourself clearly anymore. I honestly think many people today are not physically exhausted. They are emotionally overloaded. Their minds never rest. Even during quiet moments, something is always demanding attention. A notification, a headline, a message, another opinion, another pressure, telling you who you should become before you are finally allowed to feel enough. And maybe that's why peace feels so rare now. Not because peace disappeared, but because silence did. Somewhere along the way, people stopped knowing how to simply sit with themselves. Everything became stimulation. Everything became urgency. Everything became faster, louder, and more complicated. But here's something I've personally started to believe. A meaningful life is usually not built by constantly adding more. It is built by learning what to remove, removing noise, removing distraction, removing pressure that was never truly yours, removing the need to prove yourself every second of your life. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simplify, not to escape life, but to finally reconnect with it. And that is what this audiobook is really about. Not becoming lazy, not giving up ambition, not disappearing from the world, but learning how to protect your peace in a world that profits from your exhaustion. Over the next hour, we're going to explore why modern life feels so mentally heavy and why simplicity may be one of the most powerful forms of freedom left. We'll talk about the hidden cost of constant noise, the emotional weight of comparison, why busyness is slowly draining people, and how owning less can sometimes help you feel more alive again. But more importantly, this video is an invitation to slow down, to breathe, to think clearly again, to stop filling every empty space in your life just because the world taught you to fear stillness. Because maybe happiness was never hidden in having more. Maybe it was hidden underneath everything unnecessary. And maybe tonight, instead of trying to become more and more and more, you simply need permission to let go. One short note, and then we begin. You've just heard where we're going. Before Chapter 1, here's how the next hour will run. We don't run ad breaks inside these recordings. Audiobook Rise isn't in the YouTube partner program, so nothing gets inserted in the middle of a chapter. No commercial cutting across an idea while you're still holding it. From here to the final line, it's the narration and you. That's not free to do. Every recording takes hours of writing, narration, and editing, and we publish 2 to 3 of them a week. So if this channel has given you something worth keeping, you can support the work on Ko-fi. That's Ko-Fi at ko-fi.com/audiobookrise. The link is in the description below. Any amount helps. None is expected. And if you'd rather just listen, then listen. That's what this was built for. Thank you for your time. It's the one thing you can't get back. Now, settle in. Chapter 1. The more you chase, the more you lose. There's a strange emptiness that many people carry today. Not the kind that comes from failure, not the kind that comes from losing everything. It's the emptiness that appears even when life looks successful. You wake up early, you work hard, you stay busy. You keep moving toward the next goal because that's what you were taught to do. And for a while, it feels exciting. The next paycheck, the next achievement, the next purchase, the next version of yourself you believe will finally feel complete. But eventually, something changes. You begin reaching goals that once meant everything to you, and the feeling disappears faster than expected. A new phone becomes normal in 3 days. A promotion becomes stressful instead of satisfying. The excitement fades. The silence returns. And suddenly, you're chasing again. I think one of the saddest things about modern life is how many people spend years climbing toward a version of happiness they never stop to question. Because society rarely teaches you how to feel content. It teaches you how to consume more information, more entertainment, more validation, more products, more success stories from strangers online. And slowly, without realizing it, your life becomes one endless cycle of wanting. The problem is not that you have too little. The problem is that nothing ever feels like enough anymore. You can see it everywhere. People upgrade their lives constantly, but still feel emotionally drained. Their closets are full, but their minds are exhausted. Their schedules are packed, but their hearts feel disconnected. And maybe you've felt this too. Maybe there was a moment when you finally got something you wanted so badly, only to realize the happiness lasted a few hours before your mind moved on to the next thing. That's the trap. Modern culture survives by keeping people emotionally hungry. Because a person who feels deeply content is hard to control. They don't constantly seek approval. They don't desperately follow trends. They don't spend their entire lives trying to prove something. But when people feel incomplete, they become easy to influence. So the world keeps whispering the same message over and over again. You need more money, more status, more beauty, more productivity, more attention. And after hearing that message long enough, many people stop asking themselves a very important question. What am I actually chasing? Because sometimes you are not chasing happiness. You are chasing distraction from emptiness. There's a difference. I remember realizing this in a very ordinary moment. I was sitting in a room full of things I once wanted. Work was moving forward. Life looked stable. Everything appeared fine from the outside. But mentally, I felt restless all the time, not because life was terrible, but because my mind had forgotten how to stop wanting. And I think that's happening to millions of people now. The world has trained people to believe that peace is always somewhere in the future, after the next achievement, after more money, after becoming more attractive, after finally getting your life together. But peace that only exists in the future is not peace. It's psychological postponement. You keep delaying your happiness while calling it ambition. And of course, ambition itself is not the enemy. There is nothing wrong with wanting to grow, nothing wrong with building a better life, nothing wrong with dreaming bigger. The danger begins when your entire identity becomes attached to constant chasing. Because then, you no longer know how to simply exist. You cannot enjoy dinner without checking your phone. You cannot rest without feeling guilty. You cannot sit still without needing stimulation. Even your free time becomes performance. And eventually, your nervous system forgets what calm feels like. That is why so many people today feel tired all the time. Not just physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Their minds are carrying too much, too many goals, too many comparisons, too many expectations, too many voices telling them who they should become. And underneath all of it, there is a quiet fear. The fear that if they stop chasing, they might feel empty. But maybe the opposite is true. Maybe constant chasing is what created the emptiness in the first place. Because when your entire life becomes pursuit, you stop noticing what is already here. The warmth of a quiet morning, a real conversation, a peaceful evening without noise, the feeling of breathing slowly without rushing somewhere. Simple moments begin disappearing under endless ambition, and this is where simplicity becomes powerful. Not because simplicity magically solves every problem, but because it creates space. Space to think clearly, space to feel deeply, space to recognize what actually matters. A peaceful life is rarely built by adding more. It is usually built by needing less. Less validation, less comparison, less noise, less unnecessary pressure. The truth is, some people spend their entire lives trying to build a life that looks impressive, while quietly losing the ability to enjoy it. And maybe real freedom begins the moment you stop asking, "What else do I need to finally feel complete?" and start asking, "What can I let go of that is making my life heavier than it needs to be?" Because sometimes the reason you feel overwhelmed is not because life is impossible. It's because your mind was never meant to carry this much all at once. And sometimes, less really is more. Chapter 2. Silence is now a superpower. Most people are surrounded by noise from the moment they wake up. Before their minds even fully enter the day, they reach for their phones, notifications, messages, news headlines, emails, videos, music, endless scrolling before their feet even touch the floor. And after enough time, this becomes normal. The mind never pauses. The nervous system never settles. Silence slowly disappears from everyday life. But what many people don't realize is that constant noise changes you, not only emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. Because when your attention is constantly being pulled outward, you slowly lose connection with your inner world. You stop noticing your own thoughts. You stop listening to your intuition. You stop understanding what you truly feel. And eventually, you become a stranger to yourself. I think one of the quiet tragedies of modern life is that people no longer know how to be alone without stimulation. Even small moments of silence now feel uncomfortable. Waiting in line, take out the phone. Sitting in a car, turn on music immediately. Walking outside, podcast, headphones, background noise. It's almost as if the world has become afraid of stillness. But stillness is where clarity lives. You cannot hear your inner voice in a life filled with constant noise. And maybe that's why so many people feel mentally exhausted even when they haven't physically done much. Because attention is energy. Every notification steals a little of it. Every unnecessary piece of information drains a little more. Every hour spent consuming noise leaves less room for reflection, creativity, and peace. Your mind was never designed to process this much stimulation all day long. Yet modern culture rewards overstimulation. People brag about multitasking, about always being connected, about staying updated every second. But deep down, many of them are overwhelmed. Not because they are weak, because they are overloaded. There's a difference. I remember once sitting in complete silence after a very long week. No music, no scrolling, no television in the background, just silence. At first it felt uncomfortable. My mind kept searching for distraction. Something to check, something to consume, something to escape into. And that moment made me realize how dependent modern people have become on noise. Not because noise makes us happy, but because silence forces us to confront ourselves. And for many people, that feels unfamiliar. Because silence reveals things. It reveals exhaustion you've been ignoring, emotions you've been avoiding, loneliness hidden underneath constant activity, questions you've been too distracted to ask yourself. That's why some people stay busy all the time, not because they love being busy, but because stillness feels emotionally dangerous. So they keep filling every empty moment, scrolling, talking, working, consuming, distracting themselves from their own inner world. But eventually, the mind pays a price for that. When life becomes too noisy for too long, your thoughts become fragmented. You lose focus faster. You become emotionally reactive. Your patience weakens. Even simple moments start feeling mentally heavy. And the scariest part is that many people now think this state is normal. Constant distraction has become a lifestyle. But a distracted life is often a disconnected life. Disconnected from your thoughts, your emotions, your body, your presence, your peace. Silence is not empty. Silence reveals what noise has been hiding. That is why some of the clearest moments in life often happen during quiet experiences. A slow walk alone, a peaceful morning before the world wakes up, sitting near a window while it rains, driving without music for the first time in months. In those moments, something inside you starts breathing again, not because life suddenly became perfect, but because your mind finally had room to exist without interruption. And maybe that's what so many people are truly starving for now. Not more entertainment, not more information, mental space. Space to think clearly, space to feel deeply, space to simply exist without constant stimulation attacking their attention. The older I get, the more I believe peace is deeply connected to what you allow into your mind every day. Because everything affects you. The accounts you follow, the conversations you listen to, the content you consume before sleep, the noise you normalize. Most people are extremely careful about what they eat. But almost nobody is careful about what they mentally consume, and mental clutter eventually becomes emotional clutter. That's why even when people finally have time to rest, they still feel restless. Their bodies stop moving, but their minds don't. Thoughts continue racing, stress continues replaying, noise continues echoing internally. And after enough time, many people forget what true calm even feels like. But here's something important. Silence is not about escaping the world forever. It's about reconnecting with yourself long enough to hear what truly matters. Sometimes 5 quiet minutes can teach you more about your life than 5 hours of endless distraction. Because clarity rarely arrives in chaos. It arrives when the noise finally settles. And maybe this is why simplicity feels so powerful. A simpler life naturally creates more silence. Less unnecessary drama, less digital overload, less emotional chaos, less pressure to constantly perform. And inside that silence, something beautiful begins happening. You think more clearly. You react less emotionally. You become more present. You notice life again. The warmth of sunlight through a window. The sound of your own breathing slowing down. The peace of not needing to prove anything for a moment. These small experiences seem insignificant until you realize they were the very things missing from your life. Modern culture often treats silence as wasted time, but silence may actually be one of the most important forms of healing left. Because when the world becomes louder and louder, the ability to sit peacefully with yourself becomes a form of strength. In a distracted world, a calm mind is a superpower. And maybe protecting your peace does not begin with adding more positive things into your life. Maybe it begins with removing some of the noise that has been draining you all along. Chapter 3. Comparison is stealing your life. There was a time when people only compared themselves to a small circle around them. Their neighbors, their co-workers, maybe a few successful people they occasionally saw on television. But now, you can wake up in the morning and compare your entire life to thousands of people before breakfast. Someone is richer than you. Someone is more attractive. Someone is traveling somewhere beautiful. Someone is getting married. Someone is more productive. Someone appears happier, calmer, more successful, more fulfilled. And after enough exposure to carefully edited lives, something dangerous begins happening quietly inside your mind. Your own life starts feeling smaller, not because your life is bad, but because comparison distorts perception. I think many people today are emotionally exhausted not from their real lives, but from constantly measuring themselves against everyone else's highlight reel. And the worst part is that comparison never truly ends, because there will always be someone with more money, someone with more attention, someone moving faster, someone living the life you think you should already have by now. So if your peace depends on catching up, peace will never arrive. Comparison turns life into a race that has no finish line, and social media made that race endless. Every scroll quietly sends the same message: you should be doing more, you should look better, you should already be further ahead. Even when nobody says it directly, the pressure is still there. Invisible, constant, psychologically heavy, and maybe you've felt this before. You open your phone for a few minutes just to relax. But after scrolling long enough, something shifts emotionally. Suddenly your room feels boring, your progress feels slow, your body feels imperfect, your future feels behind. Nothing in your real life changed during those 10 minutes. Only your perception changed. That's how powerful comparison is. It can steal gratitude from a perfectly good life. I remember hearing someone say, "Social media makes ordinary life feel emotionally insufficient." And honestly, I think that's true. Because many people no longer experience life directly anymore. They experience life through comparison. A sunset is not enough unless it looks aesthetic online. A vacation is not enough unless it appears impressive. Even success is no longer about fulfillment, it's about visibility. And when your life becomes performance, peace quietly disappears, because performing is exhausting. You start editing yourself constantly: how you look, how you speak, what you post, what others think, whether your life appears successful enough. And eventually, you stop asking, "Am I actually happy?" You only ask, "How do I compare?" That is one of the saddest psychological traps of modern culture, because comparison disconnects you from the present moment. You cannot enjoy your own life while constantly wishing you had someone else's. And the painful irony is that many of the people you envy are also comparing themselves to someone else. The cycle never stops. One person wants more money, another wants more freedom, another wants more beauty, another wants more recognition. Everyone is chasing an image of enough that keeps moving further away. And underneath all of it is a deep fear. The fear of not being enough as you are right now. That fear drives people to overwork, overspend, overperform, and emotionally abandon themselves trying to impress a world that never stops demanding more. But at some point, you have to ask yourself something honest. How much of your stress actually belongs to your real life? And how much comes from constantly observing everyone else's? Because sometimes your life is not the problem. Overexposure is. Too many opinions, too many lifestyles, too many voices showing you endless versions of who you could become. And eventually, your mind becomes crowded with expectations that were never originally yours. This is why protecting your peace sometimes requires reducing exposure. Not because you hate people, not because ambition is bad, but because your nervous system needs space to hear its own rhythm again. I think many people underestimate how deeply comparison affects emotional health. It creates quiet dissatisfaction, the kind that follows you through ordinary moments. You could be having a peaceful evening, then suddenly see someone online living a completely different life, and within seconds, gratitude disappears. Now your mind feels restless again. Now your progress feels inadequate again. Now your life suddenly seems unfinished. That is emotional theft, and most people allow it to happen every single day without realizing it. Comparison steals joy from moments that were once enough. The dangerous thing about comparison is that it makes people abandon their natural pace. Everyone starts rushing careers, rushing healing, rushing relationships, rushing success. People panic because they think they are behind. But behind who? A stranger online? Someone living a completely different life? Someone with different opportunities, wounds, priorities, timing, and circumstances? Life becomes much heavier when you turn it into competition, and much lighter when you stop treating every human being as a measuring stick. The truth is, some of the happiest people in the world are not the ones constantly achieving more. They are the ones who learned how to appreciate what already exists in front of them. A quiet dinner, a healthy body, a peaceful home, real friendship, a calm morning. Simple things begin feeling valuable again when comparison loses its grip on your mind. And maybe that is one of the real meanings of simplicity, not owning nothing, but freeing yourself from the endless psychological pressure to constantly prove that your life matters. Because your life does not become meaningful when everyone admires it. It becomes meaningful when you are finally present enough to live it. The older I get, the more I realize peace often requires privacy, not secrecy, privacy. Keeping certain parts of your life untouched by outside opinions. Protecting moments that do not need validation. Learning how to enjoy experiences without turning them into performance. Some things become more beautiful when nobody else is watching. A slow morning, a personal goal, a healing process, a quiet walk at night. Not every meaningful moment needs an audience. And maybe real confidence is not loudly proving your worth to the world. Maybe real confidence is no longer needing to compare your path to anyone else's. Because life was never supposed to be a universal timeline. Some people bloom early, others bloom slowly. Some find peace after success. Others find success after peace. There is no single correct pace for becoming yourself. But comparison makes people forget that. It convinces them they are late to a race they were never meant to run. And maybe freedom begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I look compared to everyone else?" And start asking, "Does this life actually feel right for me?" Because at the end of the day, the goal is not to build a life that looks impressive from the outside. The goal is to build a life that feels peaceful from the inside. Peace begins when comparison ends. Chapter 4. A simple mind makes better decisions. One of the biggest reasons modern life feels overwhelming is not because people are weak. It's because their minds are overloaded. Too many choices, too many goals, too many unfinished thoughts, too many tabs open mentally at the same time. And after a while, the brain becomes exhausted from constantly switching directions. Most people think exhaustion only comes from hard work. But mental clutter can drain you just as deeply. Sometimes even more. You can feel it in everyday life. You sit down to relax, but your mind keeps jumping. Things you forgot to do. Messages you still need to answer. Goals you haven't reached yet. Worries about the future. Comparisons from earlier. Decisions you still haven't made. Even during quiet moments, your attention feels scattered. And slowly this becomes your normal state. Always thinking, always processing, always mentally busy, but rarely mentally clear. I honestly believe one of the rarest things in the modern world now is clarity, because clarity requires space, and most people's minds never get any. A cluttered mind creates a heavy life, not because life itself is impossible, but because everything starts competing for your attention at the same time. Modern culture encourages people to constantly add more goals, more information, more habits, more side hustles, more things to optimize. And eventually, self-improvement itself becomes another form of pressure. People no longer know how to simply focus on one meaningful direction. They are trying to become healthier, richer, more productive, more disciplined, more attractive, more successful, all at once. So instead of making progress peacefully, they live in a constant state of mental fragmentation. And fragmented attention creates fragmented living. You start many things, you finish very little. Your energy spreads too thin. That's why some people feel busy every day, but still feel emotionally unsatisfied. Movement is not always progress. Sometimes it is just distraction with better marketing. I remember a period in my life when I thought the answer to feeling lost was to add more structure, more goals, more plans. So I filled my days completely. Morning routines, productivity systems, constant learning, always trying to improve something. But strangely, the more I added, the more mentally noisy my life became. Eventually I realized something important. Not every problem in life needs more effort. Some problems need less mental clutter. Because when your mind becomes overloaded, even simple decisions start feeling heavy. What should you focus on? What matters most? What actually deserves your energy? You stop thinking clearly because your attention is constantly divided, and this is where simplicity becomes powerful again. Not because simple people lack ambition, but because focused people understand the value of protecting their energy. Clarity is not created by adding more. It is created by removing what does not matter. That idea sounds simple, but in reality, it changes everything. It changes how you work, how you spend time, how you organize your life, even how you think about success. Because a peaceful mind usually comes from fewer internal conflicts, fewer unnecessary commitments, fewer emotional distractions, fewer goals fighting for your attention at once. And the truth is, most people do not need more information. They need more clarity. You can see this everywhere now. People consume endless advice, productivity videos, motivation content, success strategies, self-help podcasts. But despite having more information than any generation before them, many still feel confused. Because information is not the same as wisdom, and mental consumption is not the same as mental clarity. Sometimes the more voices you listen to, the harder it becomes to hear your own. That's why highly distracted people often struggle with decision-making. Not because they are incapable, but because their minds are carrying too much noise. Every unfinished task drains attention. Every unresolved worry consumes energy. Every unnecessary obligation quietly adds emotional weight. And after enough accumulation, life begins feeling heavier than it actually is. I think many people today are not crushed by one huge problem. They are crushed by thousands of tiny mental interruptions. That constant fragmentation slowly weakens emotional resilience. You become impatient faster, overwhelmed faster, mentally tired faster. Even rest becomes less effective because your mind never fully slows down. And this creates a dangerous cycle. The more mentally exhausted you become, the harder it is to think clearly. The harder it is to think clearly, the worse your decisions become. And poor decisions create more stress. So people keep spinning inside lives that feel increasingly chaotic. But here's something interesting. If you study calm people carefully, you'll notice something. Their lives are often simpler than expected. Not empty, just intentional. They protect their time carefully. They don't say yes to everything. They don't overload themselves unnecessarily. They understand that energy is limited, and because of that, their minds stay clearer. Modern culture often glorifies complexity, but complexity is not always intelligence. Sometimes complexity is avoidance. People create complicated lives because slowing down would force them to confront what actually matters. But simple thinking requires courage, because simplicity forces honesty. What do you truly care about? What actually deserves your attention? What is draining you without adding meaning? Those questions become clearer when the noise decreases. And once clarity appears, decisions become lighter. You stop chasing 10 directions at once. You stop trying to impress everyone. You stop exhausting yourself trying to optimize every second of your existence. You begin focusing on what genuinely improves your life. A few meaningful relationships, a calmer schedule, health, peace of mind, work that matters, time to breathe, simple things, but often the most important things. A clear mind moves with more power than a distracted one ever will, because focus multiplies energy. When your attention is no longer scattered everywhere, your actions become stronger. You think deeper. You listen better, you react less emotionally, you become more present in everyday life, and slowly, life stops feeling like constant survival. Instead of reacting to everything around you, you begin living intentionally again. I think this is one of the hidden reasons simplicity feels healing. It removes unnecessary friction from the mind, and when mental friction decreases, peace naturally increases. You sleep better, you breathe slower. You stop carrying the invisible pressure of trying to do everything at once. The truth is, your brain was never designed to handle endless stimulation every waking hour. No human mind can stay healthy while constantly overloaded. At some point, something must be simplified. Not because you are failing, but because you are human. And maybe maturity is realizing that a meaningful life is not built by squeezing more into every moment. Maybe it is built by protecting your attention from everything that does not truly deserve it. Because your attention shapes your life. Whatever constantly controls your attention eventually controls your emotional state. And if your attention is permanently scattered, your peace will be scattered too. But when you simplify your focus, something powerful happens. Life begins feeling lighter again. Not because your responsibilities disappeared, but because your mind finally stopped carrying what it was never meant to hold all at once. Chapter 5. Stop filling your life to avoid yourself. There's a question most people avoid without even realizing it. What happens when everything becomes quiet? No notifications, no conversations, no distractions, no music playing in the background, no scrolling to escape into. Just you, alone with your own thoughts. For many people, that silence feels uncomfortable almost immediately, and I don't think that's an accident. Modern life has trained people to constantly distract themselves from their inner world, not because distraction truly makes them happy, but because stillness often reveals emotions they've been trying not to feel. Loneliness, regret, fear, emptiness, exhaustion. So instead of facing those feelings, people stay busy, constantly busy. They fill every empty space with something. Work, entertainment, social media, relationships, productivity, endless stimulation, anything to avoid sitting quietly with themselves for too long. But eventually, all avoidance becomes emotional weight, and that weight slowly follows you everywhere. I think many people today are not only tired because of responsibilities, they are tired because they never truly rest emotionally. Even during free time, the mind keeps escaping. You can see it in small moments. Someone finishes work and immediately opens social media without thinking. Someone turns on television the second they enter the house, because silence feels strange. Someone constantly needs noise before sleeping, because stillness feels emotionally heavy. At first, these habits seem harmless. But over time, they reveal something deeper. Many people are no longer comfortable being alone with themselves. And that creates a very dangerous relationship with life. Because if you cannot sit peacefully with yourself, you will spend your entire life trying to outrun your own mind. Sometimes the noise is not entertainment. It is emotional avoidance. That realization changes everything. Because suddenly, constant busyness no longer looks healthy. It looks like escape. And to be fair, most people do not consciously choose this. The modern world rewards distraction. The more stimulated you are, the less you pause to question your life deeply. So people keep moving, always consuming, always reacting, always staying mentally occupied. But deep down, many of them feel disconnected from themselves. I remember going through a period where silence felt unusually uncomfortable. Any moment without stimulation felt empty. If I was walking somewhere, I needed headphones. If I was eating alone, I needed a screen. If I was resting, I still needed content playing in the background. And one day I realized something unsettling. I had forgotten how to simply exist without escaping into noise. That's when I understood how addicted modern people have become to distraction. Not because distraction feels meaningful, but because it temporarily numbs uncomfortable emotions. And maybe that's why people are constantly searching for more entertainment, more stimulation, more plans, more excitement. Because the moment life becomes quiet, unresolved feelings begin surfacing, and many people would rather stay distracted forever than face what's happening inside them. But avoidance always has consequences. The emotions you refuse to acknowledge do not disappear. They wait, and eventually they show up in other ways. Anxiety, emotional numbness, burnout, irritability, chronic dissatisfaction, feeling disconnected from life itself. Because emotions buried alive never truly stay buried. The life you avoid internally eventually follows you externally. That's why simplicity can feel uncomfortable at first. A quieter life removes distractions, and when distractions disappear, reality becomes harder to avoid. You begin noticing how exhausted you actually are, how disconnected you feel, how many things in your life no longer align with who you truly are. And while that realization can feel painful, it is also the beginning of healing. Because healing requires awareness. You cannot heal a life you never slow down enough to examine. That is why stillness matters so much. Not because silence magically fixes everything, but because silence allows honesty to finally surface. In quiet moments, people often realize truths they were too distracted to hear before. Maybe they are chasing goals they no longer care about. Maybe they are surrounded by relationships that drain them. Maybe they have built an entire lifestyle around avoiding emptiness instead of creating meaning. Those realizations rarely appear during chaos. They appear during stillness, and that's exactly why so many people fear it. Stillness removes escape routes. Suddenly, there is no constant stimulation protecting you from yourself anymore, just honesty. And honesty can feel terrifying before it feels freeing. But I honestly believe one of the most powerful things a person can learn is how to sit peacefully with themselves. No performance, no distraction, no need to constantly escape, just presence. Because when you become comfortable with your own company, something changes emotionally. You stop needing constant external stimulation to feel okay. You stop chasing noise to avoid silence. You stop depending on endless validation to feel valuable. And slowly, your inner world becomes calmer. Not perfect, but calmer. Modern culture rarely teaches this. Instead, people are taught to constantly fill their lives. Fill schedules, fill conversations, fill rooms with noise, fill emptiness with consumption. But not every empty space needs to be filled. Some spaces are meant to breathe. Some silence is healthy. Some slowness is necessary. Peace often enters your life through the spaces you stop trying to fill. I think many people underestimate how healing solitude can be. Not isolation, solitude. There's a difference. Isolation disconnects you from life. Solitude reconnects you to yourself. A quiet walk alone, sitting with coffee in the early morning, watching rain hit the window without reaching for your phone, writing thoughts down honestly for the first time in months. These moments seem small, but they rebuild something modern life slowly destroys: inner connection. And without inner connection, nothing external truly satisfies for long. You can achieve success and still feel empty. You can surround yourself with people and still feel lonely. You can stay endlessly busy and still feel emotionally lost. Because external noise can never permanently silence internal disconnection. At some point, every person has to face themselves honestly. Not the version they perform online. Not the version trying to impress the world. The real version underneath all the distraction. And strangely enough, that process often begins in silence. Not dramatic silence. Simple silence. The kind modern life keeps trying to eliminate. Maybe that's why peaceful people often seem different. They move slower, react less, need less validation, appear more grounded emotionally, because they are no longer running from themselves all day long. They have learned how to exist without constantly escaping, and I think that's a form of freedom many people are secretly searching for. Not freedom from responsibilities, freedom from internal chaos. Because eventually, you realize something important. You cannot build a peaceful life while constantly avoiding your own inner world. At some point, the distractions have to quiet down. At some point, you have to stop filling every moment with noise. At some point, you have to sit with yourself long enough to ask, what am I actually feeling beneath all this busyness? And maybe the answer will change your life, because sometimes the exhaustion you feel is not from doing too much. Sometimes it comes from spending years disconnected from yourself. And maybe simplicity is powerful because it slowly brings you back home internally, back to your thoughts, back to your emotions, back to your own presence, back to the parts of yourself that noise nearly made you forget. Chapter 6. Slow down before life forces you to somewhere along the way. Exhaustion became normal. People now say things like, "I've been so busy. I barely slept. I'm running on caffeine. I haven't had time to breathe." And instead of concern, those statements are often treated like proof of importance. As if being overwhelmed means your life matters more. As if exhaustion has become a status symbol. But I think modern culture has deeply confused movement with meaning. Just because your life is full does not mean it is fulfilling. And just because you are constantly busy does not mean you are truly alive. Many people are surviving at a pace their nervous systems were never designed to handle. Wake up tired, rush through the morning, check the phone immediately, stress, emails, deadlines, notifications, more caffeine, more pressure, more mental noise, then repeat the same cycle tomorrow. And after enough repetition, people stop noticing how disconnected they've become from themselves. They no longer feel present in their own lives. They only feel rushed. A life that never slows down eventually loses its ability to feel deeply. That may sound dramatic, but you can see it everywhere now. People eat while scrolling, walk while checking notifications, listen without fully paying attention, rest while mentally worrying about tomorrow. Even moments meant for peace become contaminated by urgency. And little by little, life starts feeling mechanical. You wake up, react to responsibilities, get through the day, sleep exhausted, then do it all again. No space to think, no space to breathe, no space to simply exist. And I honestly think many people are not burned out because life is impossible. They are burned out because they have been living in survival mode for too long. The human body can tolerate stress for short periods. But modern life turned stress into a permanent lifestyle. That changes people emotionally. You become more impatient, more reactive, more emotionally numb. Small problems suddenly feel enormous because your nervous system never fully recovers. And eventually, your body begins asking for rest in ways you cannot ignore anymore. Anxiety, insomnia, mental exhaustion, emotional shutdown, constant fatigue. Sometimes the body whispers first, but if ignored long enough, eventually it screams. That's why I believe one of the most important forms of wisdom today is learning when to slow down before life forces you to. Because eventually, something always gives. Your health, your peace, your relationships, your emotional stability, or your ability to enjoy life itself. The dangerous thing about hustle culture is that it teaches people to disconnect from their own limits. People push themselves constantly because they are afraid of falling behind. So they ignore exhaustion, ignore stress, ignore emotional overload, until one day they realize they no longer recognize the person they became. They may still be functioning externally, but internally they feel empty. And maybe you've experienced this before. You finally get a quiet moment after a long week, and instead of feeling relaxed, you feel emotionally drained in a way sleep alone cannot fix. Because real exhaustion is not always physical. Sometimes your soul is tired, tired of rushing, tired of pressure, tired of carrying invisible stress every day. And the truth is, no amount of productivity can replace inner peace. Rest is not weakness. Rest is emotional maintenance. Modern society rarely respects rest unless it is earned. People feel guilty for slowing down, guilty for taking breaks, guilty for not being productive enough, guilty for choosing peace over constant achievement. But human beings are not machines. No mind stays healthy while constantly overloaded. No nervous system remains calm under endless stimulation. And maybe slowing down is not laziness. Maybe it is intelligence. Because when you slow down intentionally, you begin noticing things again. Your breathing, your thoughts, your emotions. The way stress has been sitting inside your body for months without release. Slowing down reconnects you to the present moment. And presence changes everything. A simple cup of coffee tastes different when you are not rushing. A conversation feels deeper when your attention is fully there. Even silence becomes comforting instead of uncomfortable. These small moments sound insignificant, until you realize most of your life is made of small moments. And if you are never mentally present for them, life starts passing by strangely fast. I think that's why so many people suddenly wake up years later, feeling disconnected from their own existence. They were physically there, but mentally, they were always somewhere else, worrying about the future, replaying the past, chasing the next thing, surviving the next responsibility. And while constantly rushing forward, they accidentally stopped experiencing the life happening right in front of them. That realization can feel heartbreaking, but it can also become a turning point. Because once you understand the cost of constant rushing, your priorities begin changing. You stop glorifying burnout. You stop admiring people who destroy themselves for productivity. You stop believing your worth depends on how exhausted you are. Instead, you begin protecting your peace more carefully, not because you lack ambition, but because you finally understand that success means very little if your inner life is collapsing. The older I get, the more I realize calmness is a form of wealth, a calm mind, a regulated nervous system, a peaceful evening, a slow morning without panic. These things are becoming rare now, and rare things are valuable. But protecting calmness requires difficult choices. You may need fewer commitments, less digital noise, healthier boundaries, more intentional routines, more moments without stimulation. At first, slowing down can feel strange, especially if you've spent years emotionally addicted to urgency. Some people become so used to stress that peace almost feels uncomfortable. Silence feels unfamiliar. Rest feels unproductive. Stillness feels wrong. But eventually, your mind begins adjusting. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotions settle. Your body relaxes. And slowly, you remember what it feels like to live instead of merely endure. A slower life is often not an empty life. It is a more conscious one. That doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means refusing to destroy yourself unnecessarily. Because life is not meant to feel like a constant emergency. And maybe one of the greatest forms of maturity is realizing that not everything deserves your urgency. Not every message needs an immediate answer. Not every opportunity needs to be chased. Not every pressure deserves access to your nervous system. Some things are worth letting go of, simply to protect your peace. And maybe real balance begins the moment you stop asking, "How much can I fit into my life?" and start asking, "What pace allows me to actually feel alive again?" Because at the end of the day, your life is not just measured by achievements, productivity, or external success. It is also measured by your ability to breathe peacefully, your ability to rest deeply, your ability to feel present in your own existence. And maybe slowing down is not falling behind. Maybe it is finally returning to yourself after years of moving too fast to notice who you were becoming. Chapter 7. Own less, feel more. There is a strange kind of heaviness that clutter creates. Not just physical clutter, emotional clutter, mental clutter, digital clutter, social clutter. Too many things, too many commitments, too many conversations that drain your energy. Too many possessions demanding your attention every single day. And after a while, you stop feeling free inside your own life. Because everything you own quietly asks something from you. Your attention, your time, your maintenance, your mental energy. That's why some people live in beautiful houses filled with expensive things, yet still feel emotionally exhausted the moment they walk through the door. The space looks full, but internally, they feel empty. I think modern culture convinced people that happiness comes from accumulation, more clothes, more technology, more upgrades, more luxury, more status symbols proving that your life is moving forward. But very few people stop to ask an important question: how much of what I own actually improves my peace? Because sometimes possessions stop serving you and start psychologically owning you instead. When you own too much, your life quietly becomes heavier, not all at once, slowly. One more subscription, one more responsibility, one more unnecessary purchase trying to create temporary excitement. And eventually, your environment begins reflecting your mental state: overstimulated, crowded, restless, emotionally noisy. You can often feel it immediately when walking into certain spaces. Some homes feel calm. Others feel mentally overwhelming, not because of money, because of energy. A peaceful environment changes the nervous system. Less chaos outside often creates less chaos inside. That's one reason simplicity feels so healing. Not because empty spaces magically solve emotional problems, but because simplicity reduces friction, less visual noise, less distraction, less unnecessary stimulation pulling your attention in every direction. And suddenly, your mind can breathe again. I remember cleaning out a room once, after years of holding on to things I no longer needed. Old objects, unused clothes, random items I kept just in case. And while removing those things, I realized something unexpected. The relief was emotional, not material. It felt like I was removing invisible weight I didn't even know I had been carrying, because clutter is rarely just physical. Sometimes people hold on to objects because they are holding on to old versions of themselves, old identities, old memories, old emotional attachments, old fears of letting go. That's why simplifying your life can feel strangely emotional at first. You are not only removing things, you are confronting attachment. And attachment is powerful. People become attached to possessions, routines, unhealthy relationships, constant busyness, even stress itself, because familiarity feels safe, even when it's draining. But growth often begins the moment you finally ask, "Do I truly need this anymore?" That question applies to much more than material things. Do you need every obligation, every draining conversation, every notification, every source of noise constantly entering your mind? Probably not. Yet modern life rarely encourages people to remove anything. It encourages endless accumulation, more information, more content, more possessions, more pressure. And eventually, people become buried underneath lives that feel too full to enjoy. Simplicity creates space for what truly matters. Space for calm, space for thought, space for rest, space for real connection. And honestly, many people are starving for space now. Not because they lack opportunity, because they lack breathing room. Their schedules are full, their homes are crowded, their minds are overloaded. Everything feels like too much. And when life constantly feels crowded, even beautiful moments become harder to appreciate, because your nervous system remains overstimulated. That's why simplifying your life is not about becoming extreme. It's about becoming intentional, keeping what adds meaning, removing what drains peace. And sometimes, the smallest changes create the biggest emotional relief. A cleaner room, a quieter morning, less time online, fewer meaningless obligations. More moments without distraction. Simple shifts, but powerful ones. I think many people secretly believe that living simply means sacrificing joy, but often the opposite is true. People enjoy life more when they are no longer drowning in excess, because excess creates numbness. Too much stimulation weakens appreciation. Too much noise weakens presence. Too much consumption weakens gratitude. And eventually, nothing feels special anymore. But simplicity restores sensitivity. You begin noticing small things again. Fresh air through an open window, a peaceful conversation, the feeling of calm after putting your phone away, the emotional relief of having less chaos around you. These moments seem ordinary until you realize they create the foundation of a peaceful life. The truth is, many people are not searching for more excitement anymore. They are searching for relief. Relief from pressure, relief from mental overload, relief from the exhausting feeling that life never slows down. And simplicity offers that relief quietly. Not dramatically, quietly. That's why some of the happiest people often live surprisingly simple lives. Not empty lives, focused lives. Lives with room to breathe. Lives where peace matters more than performance. Lives where people are no longer trying to prove their worth, through constant accumulation. Because eventually, you realize something important. Your life becomes more meaningful, not when you add endless things, but when you finally protect what truly matters from unnecessary noise. And maybe owning less is powerful, because it helps you experience more presence, more gratitude, more clarity, more peace. Not because the world became less chaotic, but because your inner world finally became lighter. Chapter 8. The simplest life is often the most powerful. When people think about power, they usually imagine something loud: status, money, influence, attention, someone constantly moving, constantly achieving, constantly proving themselves to the world. But the older I get, the more I realize real power often looks very different from that. Real power is calm. It's the ability to stay grounded in a world designed to overwhelm you. It's waking up without immediately feeling consumed by anxiety. It's protecting your peace without needing permission from others. It's knowing who you are without constantly needing validation to confirm it. And honestly, that kind of strength is becoming rare, because modern life constantly pressures people to perform. Perform success, perform happiness, perform importance. Everyone is trying to appear extraordinary. Meanwhile, many are quietly exhausted inside. That's why simplicity can feel almost rebellious now. A simple life says, I no longer need endless noise to feel alive. A simple life says, my peace matters more than constant performance. A simple life says, I would rather feel whole than look impressive. And I think that mindset changes everything emotionally. Because once you stop building your life around external approval, something inside you relaxes. You stop chasing attention from people who barely know you. You stop exhausting yourself trying to keep up with impossible standards. You stop turning every part of your existence into competition. Instead, life becomes more honest, more intentional, more grounded, more real. The strongest people are often the ones who no longer need to prove how strong they are. You can usually feel this energy immediately around certain people. They are calm without trying to appear calm, confident without arrogance, present without needing attention. There's something peaceful about them, not because their lives are perfect, but because they stopped fighting themselves internally all the time. And maybe that is the hidden goal of simplicity, not perfection. Inner alignment. Your outer life begins matching what truly matters to you internally. No more endless pretending, no more chasing identities that don't feel authentic. No more building a life that looks successful but feels emotionally empty. Instead, you begin creating a life you can actually breathe inside. A life where your nervous system can rest, your mind can slow down, your emotions are not constantly overwhelmed, and strangely enough, this often makes people more powerful, not less. Because distracted people lose energy easily, but peaceful people conserve it. They think clearly, move intentionally, react less emotionally, choose carefully what deserves their attention. That is real strength, not constant aggression, not endless hustle. Clarity. I think many people spend years searching for happiness in intensity, more excitement, more stimulation, more dramatic experiences. But eventually, many realize something surprising. Peace feels deeper than excitement. A quiet morning can feel richer than a crowded party. A calm mind can feel more luxurious than expensive possessions. A meaningful conversation can feel more fulfilling than temporary validation from strangers online. Simple things begin carrying extraordinary value once your nervous system is no longer addicted to chaos. And maybe that's why peaceful people often appear different from the rest of the world. They are no longer emotionally rushing all the time. They are not desperate to impress everyone. They are not constantly comparing themselves. They are not filling every silence with noise. They move slower internally. And because of that, they actually experience life more deeply. A peaceful life is not a small life. It is a conscious one. That distinction matters, because many people hear the word simple and imagine limitation. But simplicity is not limitation. It is freedom from excess, freedom from unnecessary pressure, freedom from endless distraction, freedom from emotional clutter that steals your ability to enjoy life. And honestly, I think many people are closer to peace than they realize, not because they need to completely change their lives overnight, but because so much of their suffering comes from things that are unnecessary, unnecessary noise, unnecessary comparison, unnecessary urgency, unnecessary attachment. Once those things begin falling away, life often becomes lighter naturally. Not perfect, but lighter. And maybe that's all many people truly want now. Not perfection, just breathing room, a calmer mind, a slower heart, a life that no longer feels emotionally overcrowded every single day. I think one of the saddest things modern culture has done is convince people that slowing down means falling behind. But behind what? A race that never ends? A system that profits from exhaustion? A world that constantly changes the definition of enough? At some point, you have to decide what kind of life is actually worth living. One built around endless pressure, or one built around presence. Because in the end, most people will not remember how many emails they answered, how productive they looked, how perfectly optimized their schedules were. They will remember how life felt, how peaceful they were, how deeply they loved, how present they allowed themselves to be. And maybe real success is not building a life that constantly impresses the outside world. Maybe it's building a life that finally feels peaceful inside your own mind. A life with less noise, less pressure, less pretending, and more truth, more breathing room, more life. Because sometimes, less really is more. Maybe the most dangerous lie modern life ever taught people is that happiness is always somewhere else, somewhere ahead of you, somewhere bigger, louder, more impressive. So people spend years chasing more success, more possessions, more validation, more productivity, hoping that eventually they will arrive at peace. But for many people, peace never comes, because peace was never hiding in more. It was hiding underneath everything unnecessary. And I think the older you get, the more you begin realizing something important. A meaningful life is not built only through achievement. It is also built through presence. Through being able to sit quietly in your own life, without constantly feeling the need to escape it. That's rare now. Most people are mentally somewhere else all the time, thinking about tomorrow, comparing themselves to strangers, trying to keep up with expectations that never stop growing. Meanwhile, life keeps passing quietly in front of them. The peaceful mornings, the small conversations, the moments that never look important online, but somehow become the moments that matter most later. And maybe that's why simplicity feels so powerful, because simplicity brings you back to what is real. Back to your breath, back to your thoughts, back to your own presence. Not every empty space needs to be filled. Not every silence needs noise. Not every moment of your life needs to become performance. Sometimes peace enters your life the moment you stop trying so hard to become everything at once. I honestly believe many people are not searching for a completely different life. They are searching for relief. Relief from pressure, relief from overstimulation, relief from the exhausting feeling that their minds never truly rest. And maybe that relief begins with something smaller than people expect. A quieter morning, a slower evening, less comparison, less distraction, less emotional clutter. Simple changes, but sometimes simple things change life the most. Because when your mind becomes calmer, everything begins feeling different. You think more clearly. You breathe more deeply. You stop reacting to every little thing. You start noticing beauty in ordinary moments again. And slowly, life no longer feels like something you are constantly trying to survive. It starts feeling like something you are finally experiencing. Maybe that is the real magic of a simple life. Not that it removes every problem, but that it gives your soul enough space to breathe again. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this audiobook, it's this. You do not need to earn peace by exhausting yourself first. You do not need to prove your worth through constant busyness. And you do not need to spend your entire life chasing more and more just because the world told you to. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is slow down, to listen, to breathe, to let go of what no longer matters, because one day you may realize the best parts of life were never the loudest ones. They were the quiet moments you were finally present enough to feel.